The fifth day of the trial began like any other. Legal teams arranging documents, journalists settling into their seats, the low murmur of whispered conversations filling the air. Outside, the usual crowd of spectators and reporters had gathered, coffees in hand, waiting for another day of testimony. No one could have predicted what was about to unfold. At precisely 8:12 a.m., 17 minutes before the proceedings were scheduled to begin, a single social media post changed everything. The plaintiff hadn't yet arrived. The judge was still in chambers. But in the digital world, an earthquake had just struck. Its aftershocks about to be felt throughout the justice system and the entire entertainment industry. Justin Bieber, global superstar and once the music industry's golden child, had finally broken his silence. For years, the connection between Bieber and the defendant had been the subject of uncomfortable speculation. Old interviews showing a teenage Bieber alongside the powerful mogul had circulated online since the allegations first surfaced. Footage that once seemed innocent but now carried darker implications. The industry titan had positioned himself as a mentor, a guide, a father figure to the young Canadian singer. He had opened doors, facilitated introductions, shaped a career. Now, with a single post to his 270 million followers, Bieber had shattered that narrative forever. The post was deceptively simple. A black and white photograph taken years earlier at an industry event, showing Bieber standing beside the plaintiff. But it was the caption that ignited the firestorm. "Cassie, I see you. I remember what I saw, and I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner." Within minutes, the post had been screenshotted, shared, and analyzed across every major platform. News alerts pinged on phones worldwide. Entertainment journalists abandoned breakfast meetings to file urgent updates. Inside the courthouse, where devices were still permitted before the session began, the reaction was immediate and visceral. Court reporters who had been casually checking their phones suddenly straightened in their seats. A prosecution assistant sprinted down the hallway, printout in hand. The defense team, gathered in a small anteroom for last-minute preparation, fell silent as one member urgently displayed his screen to the others. And that's when the defendant first saw it. According to multiple witnesses, he had been reviewing notes with his lead attorney when an associate rushed in, ashen-faced. Several phones were handed to him in quick succession. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to something witnesses would later describe as cold fury. He demanded privacy. His legal team cleared the room. Through the door, court staff reported hearing a sharp crash, later discovered to be a water pitcher shattered against the wall. By the time the judge entered the courtroom at 8:45 a.m., the atmosphere had transformed entirely. What had been routine was now electric. What had been procedural was now historic. Everyone knew what had happened, but no one dared speak of it directly, not until the proceedings officially began. The defendant entered with his legal team, his composed facade notably strained. His customary confident stride had been replaced by stiff, deliberate movements. His jaw was visibly clenched. His eyes darted across the gallery, searching for reactions, for whispers, for judgment. What he found was a room full of people who could now see the cracks in the armor. The plaintiff arrived moments later, escorted by her attorneys. Those closest to her noted something different in her demeanor, a quiet resolve that hadn't been present on previous days. Her shoulders were squared, her gaze steady. She had not yet been informed of Bieber's post, her team having decided to wait until after the day's testimony to avoid any disruption to her state of mind. But she didn't need to know. The energy in the room told her everything had changed. As proceedings began, the defense requested an immediate sidebar with the judge. Their urgent whispers carried just far enough for the first row of spectators to catch fragments. Prejudicial. Social media. Mistrial. The judge listened, face impassive, before denying whatever motion had been hastily assembled. "We will proceed as scheduled," she announced, voice firm. "The jury has been sequestered and has not been exposed to any outside information." The defendant leaned toward his attorney, whispering something that made the lawyer's expression tighten. For the first time since the trial began, harmony seemed absent between client and counsel. The prosecution, meanwhile, appeared quietly confident as they called their witness back to the stand. They had been blindsided by Bieber's statement just like everyone else, but they were quick to recognize its value. It wasn't admissible as evidence, not yet, but its existence had shifted the atmosphere in ways that legal procedure. People I trusted. Were any of these people in the music industry? A few, yes, but they were usually younger artists, people who didn't have enough power to help or speak up. Can you name any of these individuals? Before she could answer, the defense objected vehemently. The judge sustained, but the question had accomplished its purpose. Every person in that courtroom was thinking the same name, wondering the same thing. What exactly had Justin Bieber seen? The morning progressed with testimony about incidents from 2015 to 2017, precisely the years when Bieber had been frequently photographed in the defendant's orbit. With each question, with each recounted memory, the unspoken connection grew stronger. Then came the moment that would define Day 5. During a brief recess, a clerk approached the prosecution table with a tablet. Urgent whispers were exchanged. When court resumed, the prosecutor addressed the judge. Your Honor, we've just received confirmation of evidence that directly corroborates the plaintiff's testimony regarding the defendant's controlling behavior. We request permission to introduce text messages exchanged between Ms. Ventura and Justin Bieber from 2017. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The defense team rose as one, objections tumbling over each other. The judge called for order, her gavel striking 3 times before silence returned. Approach the bench, she instructed both teams. What followed was a heated discussion, voices kept low but body language speaking volumes. The defense counsel gesticulated sharply. The prosecutor remained calm, presenting documents from the tablet. After several minutes, the judge nodded. I'll allow it, she announced. The messages will be entered into evidence. What happened next was described by one court artist as watching someone physically crumble while trying desperately to appear intact. The defendant's composure, already strained, began to fracture visibly. His right leg bounced uncontrollably beneath the table. His hands, previously folded calmly, now gripped the edge of his seat. His breathing became audible even from several feet away. The prosecution displayed the text exchange on screens visible to the court. Cassie, I don't know what to do anymore. He monitors everything. Justin, that's not normal. You need to talk to someone. This isn't okay. Simple words. Devastating impact. These weren't new allegations crafted for trial. This wasn't testimony that could be dismissed as opportunistic. This was contemporaneous evidence from 2017, years before any lawsuits, years before any public accusations. This was proof that the plaintiff had confided her fears to someone else long ago, and that someone had recognized the situation as dangerous. The defense attorney placed a steadying hand on his client's shoulder. It was brushed away. When questioning resumed, the plaintiff explained the context behind the messages. I reached out to Justin because he was one of the few people who had seen how the defendant behaved when he thought no one important was watching. Justin was young, but he wasn't blind. He noticed things. What kinds of things did he notice? The prosecutor asked. How the defendant would interrupt me during interviews. How I wasn't allowed to speak to certain people without him present. How my schedule was controlled down to the minute. She paused, then added, there was an incident at an after-party in 2015 where the defendant grabbed my arm too hard because I was laughing with another artist. Justin saw it happen. He texted me the next day to ask if I was okay. Each word seemed to land like a physical blow. The defendant shifted in his seat, whispered urgently to his attorney, then grabbed a pen and began scribbling furiously on a legal pad. Whatever strategy they had prepared for this day was disintegrating before their eyes. Then came the video. Your Honor, the prosecutor began, we'd like to submit a piece of security footage from the Beverly Hills Hotel. dated September 14, 2018. Again, objections erupted. Again, they were overruled. The lights dimmed slightly as the footage appeared on screens throughout the courtroom. The quality was grainy but clear enough to make out the figures and their actions. The plaintiff stood in the hotel lobby, engaged in conversation with a male artist. The interaction appeared casual, professional, entirely appropriate. Then the defendant entered the frame. He didn't shout. He didn't cause a scene. His actions were subtle, deliberate, composed, and all the more chilling for their restraint. He approached directly, placed a firm hand around the plaintiff's waist, and leaned close to whisper something in her ear. The change in her demeanor was immediate and unmistakable. Her smile vanished, her posture stiffened, her head lowered slightly. He guided her away from the conversation, his hand never leaving her waist. 40 seconds of footage. A lifetime of implications. When the lights returned to normal, the courtroom remained unnaturally silent. The plaintiff sat motionless, eyes forward, refusing to look at either the screens or her former partner. The defendant stared at the table before him, jaw working, tension radiating from every line of his body. It was then that something inside him seemed to snap. Without warning, his fist came down on the table with such force that water glasses jumped and papers scattered. "This is all lies," he shouted, rising to his feet. "All of it." Security personnel moved immediately, positioning themselves closer to the defense table. The judge's gavel came down sharply. "Mr. Combs, control yourself," she warned, voice cutting through the chaos. But he continued, turning toward the plaintiff. "You know damn well that's not what happened." Then, gesturing toward where the evidence had been displayed. "And him, after everything I did for him." His attorney physically attempted to pull him back into his seat. He shoved the man away, sending him stumbling backward. "Remove the jury," the judge ordered, rising from her seat as court officers rushed to escort the 12 men and women from the room. Throughout the outburst, the plaintiff never flinched, never reacted. Her stillness seemed to further inflame the defendant. "You're making this up," he continued, voice growing hoarse with emotion. "Loyalty means nothing anymore." Then came the words that would dominate headlines for days to come. "I'll make sure he never works in this town again. Neither of them will." The threat against a global superstar and the plaintiff echoed through the now emptied courtroom. The lead defense attorney placed his head in his hands, physically distancing himself from his client. The prosecution team watched in silence, making no objections, allowing the moment to unfold with all its damning implications. The judge's response was measured but icy. "Mr. Combs, you don't control what happens in this courtroom. One more outburst and I will have you removed and held in contempt." Security officers now flanked him on both sides, their presence no longer precautionary but necessary. The defendant finally sank back into his chair, the fury in his expression giving way to something closer to shock. The realization, perhaps, of what he had just revealed about himself. When the jury returned, they found a transformed scene. The defendant now surrounded by guards, his legal team visibly distressed, the very power dynamic that had been described in testimony physically manifested before them. The rest of Day 5 proceeded with a strange, tense calm. The plaintiff returned to the stand, her composure intact, her testimony unwavering. She described a control architecture, a system designed to isolate her, monitor her movements, manage her relationships. It wasn't protection, she explained, voice steady. It was ownership. As court adjourned, the impact extended far beyond the walls of the judicial building. Justin Bieber's post had accumulated over 15 million likes and 3 million shares. Celebrities who had remained silent began issuing statements of support for the plaintiff. A former producer who had worked on 3 major projects with the defendant went public with his own allegations. Former employees contacted the prosecution team, offering testimony. The dam had broken. Outside the courthouse, as evening shadows lengthened across the steps, Reporters asked the obvious question: why had Bieber chosen this moment to speak out? For the music industry, Day 5 marked the beginning of a long overdue reckoning. For the plaintiff, it represented validation after years of isolation and fear. For the defendant, it signaled the collapse of a carefully constructed empire built on intimidation and control. And for a justice system often criticized for favoring the powerful, it demonstrated that sometimes the truth needs just one voice brave enough to speak it for others to find their own. The trial continues, but after Day 5, something fundamental has changed. The silence that protected powerful men has been broken, and in its place, a chorus of voices is beginning to rise. Sometimes justice arrives in unexpected ways, not through legal procedure alone, but through the courage of those who finally decide that enough is enough.